Several years ago, I was at a meditation workshop, and in order to put us into a safe, tranquil frame of mind, the meditation leader had us tune in to our infant selves in the womb. And while she continued the guided meditation in her calm, soothing voice, I barely heard anything else she said, because I was struggling to find that safe, tranquil place that the womb is meant to represent, and that it did for all the other participants. But for me, the womb was a rocky beginning to my life in this world. So let me back up. My parents were World War II Holocaust survivors who met in the far from idyllic spot of a farm labor camp in the snowbound frozen wasteland of northeastern Siberia. The one good thing is that my mother was able to be with her parents throughout this ordeal. Released from the camp after the war, with the help of Jewish agencies, my mom walked across Europe pregnant with me till they arrived at the displaced persons DP camp of Bad Reichenhall in southeastern Germany, where I was born. So already a 2,000-mile trek from wherever I was conceived to the place where I was born. This is my story, which I know viscerally and emotionally, but many of the early memories come from my mother. I have learned that Native American women sing to their babies in the womb, and they think good thoughts in order to infuse their developing infants with good feelings. And women of many other cultures also know and practice this. Well, I found no such comfort in my early life. The environment into which I was born was teeming with the pains, the angers, the griefs of all the survivor refugees. And as I realized later, I probably received very little comfort from my mother, who was usually distant and was paralyzed by her own traumatizations. And I don't think I received much comfort from my grandmother, who I remember from a photograph of steely blue eyes staring out from a cold face. Somehow I sensed that my grandfather held me. And during this time, my father had been imprisoned in a Soviet prison, and so I was already 8 months old by the time he arrived at the camp. So somehow early on, I knew I had to find my own meaning in this life. And I found that through language. Yiddish was the first language I spoke. Was meint ein Leben ohne Nachricht? What is life without joy? My parents and grandparents spoke Yiddish, and probably many of the refugees in the camp. But I also heard many other languages: Russian, Polish, German, Hungarian, Romanian, Roma, and probably many more. And I may have uttered some words or phrases in some of these languages. And of course, at that time, I did not yet realize how important language would be in my life. When I was a little over a year old, we left the camp, and as with many other refugees, our transit took us to Paris, France. And so French became the second language I learned. Ooh la la, c'est toujours avec moi le français. French is always with me. In retrospect, this seemed like a respite in my early life. Photographs show a happy family of 3, me and my parents, smiling, plump, well-fed after all the deprivations of war. And the pictures come from various spots around Paris. We lived in the Montmartre part of town, the same area where Edith Piaf lived. And even though I was a toddler daughter of Orthodox Jewish parents, so I doubt I visited any of the boîtes, the nightclubs where Edith Piaf sang, still, her music just resonates deep within me, as still does the French language. Well, after almost a year, we left Paris, went to Bordeaux, and boarded a steamship to head towards the US. And as we neared the ending of this crossing, one day my mother is running through the ship, frantically screaming, holding a limp toddler in her arms, screaming for the doctor because her baby daughter had stopped breathing. As she was to tell me later, I had died. She said I was gone for 20 minutes, but I don't think that's possible. I never did find out exactly what happened and what made me die for the time I was out. So I wonder, was it medical? Was I not able to resist some germ or some kind of rotten food? Was it emotional? Was I already ready to check out of this life at that young age? Or maybe it was spiritual, some grander cosmic design that I had yet to fulfill. Well, in any case, I came back, so I'm here to tell you the story. And once I was back, I belonged more to this new world we were coming to than the old world my parents had left. And so what was intended to be a 2-day transit stay turned into a 2-year sojourn, and we lived in Havana, Cuba. And so now Spanish became the third language I spoke. Ay caramba, cubana, la más rápida lengua del mundo. Cuban Spanish, the fastest spoken language in the world. So I have a few memories from Cuba. We lived in a pink apartment building. I used to ride my tricycle around the circle in the park. And I remember at the age of 3 or 4 giving up my innate view of the world in order to accept my dad's view. Because after all, he was the adult, and he was my father. And so I became lonely in my mind and my thoughts. And finally, after 2 years, we were able to leave Cuba and arrived in the US, settling in Atlanta, Georgia, where my mother's sister and her family had been sent by the US Refugee Agency after the war. And the loneliness of my early life continued. I mostly played alone in our huge backyard. And though I was an immigrant Jewish girl, I played as if I were a native person living there before any of the Europeans ever arrived. I would find arrowheads, and I would imagine what it was like living out there on the land. Now these are a few highlights of lonely points in my early life, which I later realized became seeds for transformation. Many years later, in 1980, I joined a cross-country walk called the Long Walk for Survival, a spiritual walk for world peace and the preservation of Mother Earth that was led by Native Americans. My first day on the walk, I reconnected with my own view of the world that I had given up so many years before. And I realized that that view of the world corresponded to many basic Native American values and perceptions of the world. And it was on that walk that I also met my life partner. I also came to realize the benefit I had gained from living my early life in a place filled with people of so many nationalities, speaking so many different languages. I have developed a facility for language, and I love learning and speaking different languages, which is still part of my passion. And my early travels have also continued, as I still love traveling, and I often lead tours abroad. So while these early lonely experiences certainly shaped the trajectory of my life, I have also found ways of transforming them into the person I have now become. Thank you.